Your father isn't here to protect you anymore, so I suggest you stop acting like he is. My mother set the folder on the kitchen table the way you'd drop a bill at a restaurant. Quick, clean, already expecting payment. Inside was a deed of relinquishment, my name at the top, a signature line at the bottom, and in between, 2 pages of legal language that would transfer my father's $380,000 trust account and the lake house in Traverse City, the one that still had his fishing tackle, hanging on the garage wall, entirely to my brother. She was not asking me, she was informing me of a decision that had already been made. Before I tell you how this ended, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. I had driven up to Kalamazoo from Chicago that morning with my husband Seth. The two of us in the front seat of our Civic, gas station coffee going cold in the cup holder, a box of my father's favorite shortbread cookies on the back seat, because I didn't know what else to bring to a house that no longer had him in it. He had died 11 days earlier, pancreatic cancer, 6 weeks from diagnosis to funeral, fast and merciless and nothing like the man he had been. Seth had offered to come inside. I told him to wait in the car. I thought it would be 30 minutes. I thought I was walking into a conversation. I was wrong. My mother Gloria stood at the head of the kitchen table with the posture of someone who had rehearsed this moment. My brother Wade sat to her left, arms crossed, looking anywhere but at me. He was 41, 14 years older than me. My father's son from his first marriage, legally adopted by my mother when they married. Growing up, I had genuinely believed we were close. I had believed a lot of things about my family that turned out to be inventory errors. Your father's accountant will need the signed deed by end of business Friday, my mother said. Wade needs to consolidate the estate before the probate period closes. I looked at the document, then I looked at her. Dad's will left the trust and the lake house to me. You were both at the reading. The reading was preliminary, she said. Your father updated his wishes before he passed. There's a codicil. She produced a second document and slid it across the table. A codicil, an amendment to a will, dated 3 weeks before my father died. His signature at the bottom, notarized. I'm a forensic accountant. I have spent 6 years auditing financial records for fraud investigation. I have testified in 4 federal cases. My job, in its most basic form, is to look at documents and find the lie hiding inside the numbers. I looked at that codicil for 12 seconds. That was all it took. The notary stamp in the bottom right corner belonged to a firm in downtown Kalamazoo. The document was dated October 14th. My father had been in the hospital since October 9th, sedated for pain management, and had not left that building alive. I had been there. I had held his hand on October 14th while a nurse adjusted his morphine drip. He had not signed anything. He had not even been awake. This is forged, I said. The word dropped into the room like a stone into still water. My mother's expression did not change. That was the tell. A person who hears a false accusation flinches. A person who hears the truth go named out loud, they go very, very still. You're being hysterical, she said. You've been emotional since the funeral and I understand that, but I was with him on October 14th, I said. He was unconscious. Wade pushed back from the table. He stood up. He was 6'2" and had been the kind of man who used his size to fill a room since he was 17. Just sign the papers, Fallon. His voice was low in the way that isn't calm. It's compressed. Pressure behind a valve. I'm not signing anything. What happened next was fast. Wade moved around the table toward me, not slow and deliberate, sudden, like a car lurching forward when you don't expect the gear to catch. His hand closed around my forearm and he shoved me backward. My lower back hit the granite edge of the counter first. Then my wrist, my right wrist, the one I was using to brace myself, caught the corner of a cabinet handle as I went down. The sound it made was not a crack, it was more like a snap, dry, final. I did not scream. I sat on the kitchen floor and did what I had trained myself to do under pressure. I assessed right wrist. Sharp, immediate pain radiating from the distal radius, swelling already beginning, likely a fracture. Do not try to use the hand. Stabilize. Get out. My mother looked down at me the way I'd seen people look at a car broken down on the side of the road. Inconvenient. An obstacle to be routed around. Get up, she said. Stop being dramatic. I got up. Not because she told me to. Because staying on the floor meant giving her the picture she wanted. A daughter she could manage. A body that had been put in its place. I tucked my right hand against my chest and walked out of the kitchen. Through the hallway. Out the front door. Seth was leaning against the car scrolling his phone. He looked up. His face did something complicated in about half a second. Processed, calculated, moved. He was at my side before I reached the driveway. What happened? Why are you holding your arm like? I need you to drive Bronson Methodist now. He didn't ask another question. He got in the car. That is the thing about the right person. They read the situation before they read the room. In the car, I told him everything. The deed, the codicil, Wade, the counter edge. He listened without interrupting, which is harder than it sounds. By the time we pulled into the hospital parking lot, his knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "We're calling the police," he said. "We will. But I need documentation first. Medical records create a timestamp. That timestamp becomes evidence. Right now, the most important thing I can do is bleed on Piper, figuratively speaking." He looked at me. "You're already building the case." I never stopped. The ER diagnosed a distal radius fracture, non-displaced, which was the one piece of luck in the whole day. They splinted it, prescribed ibuprofen, and gave me discharge paperwork with the mechanism of injury, documented exactly as I described: blunt force trauma to the right wrist, following a physical confrontation with a family member. It's made sure those words were in the notes. I asked the attending to read them back to me. While Seth filled my prescription at the hospital pharmacy, I sat in a plastic chair in the waiting room and looked at my phone. 14 missed calls, 9 from my mother, 5 from Wade. The texts had started coming in while I was being x-rayed. From my mother: "You are embarrassing this family. Come back to the house and we will discuss this like adults." From Wade: "You tripped. You know you tripped. Don't make this into something it isn't." From my mother again: "Your father would be ashamed of how you're behaving." I read them twice. Then I set the phone face down on the chair and stared at the ceiling tiles and let myself have 30 seconds of pure, clean rage before I put it away. Because I knew exactly what this was. I had seen this pattern in deposition transcripts more times than I could count. The incident had already been rewritten. Wade hadn't shoved me. I had tripped. It had barely happened. It was being revised in real time, before my wrist was even set, because they needed the story clean before anyone official could hear the messy version. They were not the first people to underestimate me. They would be the last. Seth came back with the prescription and sat beside me without a word. After a moment, he rested his hand on my uninjured arm, just placed it there. That was enough. "Okay," I said, "here's what we're going to do." I had heard of the gray rock method years earlier from a colleague navigating a difficult situation with a controlling parent. The concept is this: when dealing with someone who thrives on emotional reaction, who feeds off your fear, your anger, your defensiveness, you give them nothing to feed on. You become as flat and uninteresting as a stone. You don't argue, you don't correct, you don't explain. You let them believe they've won. And while they're celebrating, you build everything you need. I typed my response to my mother's texts. It had to sound exactly like the daughter she expected: wounded, retreating, ready to fold. "I'm sorry. You're right, I've been emotional. I went to urgent care, it's just a sprain. I'm not ready to sign anything today, but I'm willing to talk more. Can we meet tomorrow? I want to understand what Dad really wanted." The reply came in 3 minutes: "Of course. Come by in the morning. We'll work through this as a family." I saved that message. I saved all of them. Then I called Dominic, the probate attorney who had handled my father's estate. He was a solo practitioner in Kalamazoo, mid-60s, the kind of lawyer who wore reading glasses on a chain and had practiced family law long enough to have seen every version of this story. I laid out everything: the codicil, the notarization date, my father's hospital records, the incident in the kitchen. There was a long pause. "The notary on that codicil," he said slowly. "Do you have the stamp number?" I had photographed the document before I left the kitchen. I read it off to him. Another pause. "That's a notary commission that was suspended in September. The stamp is invalid. The document it's attached to cannot be legally executed." The deed of relinquishment had been built on a foundation that didn't legally exist. "Mr. Dominic," I said, "I need to walk back into that house tomorrow with my family believing I'm there to surrender. Can you help me make sure the right people are in the room when I do?" He was quiet a moment. "I'm a mandatory reporter under Michigan probate law. If I witness a confession of fraud in a matter I'm overseeing, I am required to act. I have no discretion in that." "I know," I said. "I'm counting on it." Seth had been listening to the whole call. When I hung up, he looked at me in a way that was partly admiration and partly something closer to grief. The recognition that the person you love is capable of this kind of precision at the worst moment of their life. "What do you need me to do?" he asked. "Come with me tomorrow," I said, "and let me do the talking." The next morning was cold. November in Michigan has a particular personality, gray and flat and serious, like the sky reminding you not to expect warmth. We drove to the house in silence. Seth kept his hand on my knee most of the way. I kept my splinted wrist rested on the armrest between us. I had dressed carefully, not to look strong, to look diminished. Soft gray sweater, hair down, no makeup to sharpen my face. I needed my mother to see surrender when she looked at me. I needed her to feel so certain of her position that she got careless. Seth waited in the entryway, close enough to hear, far enough to stay out of it. My mother was at the kitchen table, Wade beside her. A third person I didn't recognize sat at the far end, a man in his 50s with the look of someone used to delivering bad news, a leather portfolio open in front of him. "This is Harris," my mother said. "He helped prepare the documents." I sat down. I winced as I settled my splinted wrist in my lap. I let the wince do some work for me. "I've been thinking about what you said," I started, keeping my voice small. "About what Dad would have wanted. About family." I looked at the deed on the table. "I just need to understand something before I sign, for my own peace of mind." My mother's posture shifted almost imperceptibly. She was relaxing, that was the tell. She thought the fight was already over. "The codicil," I said. "Can you tell me how it came about? Dad was pretty out of it those last weeks. I want to know he was lucid when he signed." I kept my eyes soft, confused. A daughter who just needs reassurance. Wade glanced at my mother, then back at me. He had a clear morning, early October. He told us what he wanted and we made sure it was documented. Before October 9th? Because the codicil is dated the 14th. The silence that followed was a different quality. Thicker. "The paperwork was finalized later," my mother said. "Administrative timing." "So there's a gap between when he signed and when it was notarized," I said. "And the notary whose stamp is on it." "Dwight Sims at Lakeshore Document Services. You used him specifically?" Wade's jaw tightened. "We used whoever was available." "Dwight Sims's notary commission was suspended on September 22nd, I said. 3 weeks before the date on that document. A suspended notary cannot execute a legal instrument in the state of Michigan, which means the codicil doesn't exist, which means the will that was read at Mr. Dominic's office, the one where my father left the trust and the lake house to me, is still the controlling document." My mother's face cycled through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion, recalibration. Then something cold and focused, the look of someone deciding which version of this story still saves them. "You came here to ambush us," she said. "I came here because you asked me to. I'm just asking questions." Wade stood up. "You think you're so smart," he said. His voice was tight, and underneath the tightness was something that had been building for a long time. Not anger at me specifically, but the kind that accumulates when a person has spent years feeling like they were handed less than they deserved. "You were always Dad's project, his perfect daughter." "You know what I was? I was the one who drove him to chemo. I was the one who sat in that hospital room at 2 in the morning when you were in Chicago building your career. And he left it to you. Everything. Because you were better at making him feel like you loved him more. But Mom is going to lose the house, Fallon. She borrowed against it last spring for an investment that didn't pay out. She's carrying a $210,000 shortfall. If she doesn't access the trust by the end of the year, she loses everything. She asked me to help, so I helped her. What was I supposed to do?" The room went very still. I looked at my mother. She was staring at Wade with an expression I had never seen on her face. Not blankness, but the specific horror of someone watching a carefully constructed wall fall over in slow motion. "So the codicil was your idea," I said to her, not a question. She said nothing. "Wade," I kept my voice even, "you just admitted to conspiracy to commit probate fraud. Forgery, potentially elder fraud depending on how those documents were assembled while Dad was incapacitated." I paused. "Those are felonies in Michigan." The door to the hallway opened. Dominic stepped through. He had arrived before us. Seth had quietly confirmed our arrival time with my mother the previous afternoon, casually asking her to leave the back door accessible. She had agreed without a second thought. Dominic was not alone. A Kalamazoo County Sheriff's deputy and a detective from the county's Financial Crimes Unit stood beside him. I had spoken to the detective the previous afternoon when I filed my initial report. "This is a private family matter," my mother said immediately. Her voice had returned to its usual register: controlled, righteous, practiced. "My daughter is emotionally unstable since her father's death. She is making accusations that have no basis." "Ma'am," the deputy said, "we have a report filed yesterday with supporting medical documentation, a forensic review of the notarial stamp on the contested document, and a witness statement from the estate's probate attorney, who was present in this room just now. I need you and Mr. Wade to come with us." My mother looked at me. It was the first time in my life I could not read her face. I had spent 28 years studying her expressions, learning which ones meant danger, which ones meant the fight was coming. But this one was new. This was the expression of someone standing at the edge of a map they didn't know existed. Wade sat back down, his shoulders dropped. He looked for the first time like a man who was simply tired. They walked my mother and brother out through the front door. I stayed in the kitchen. Seth appeared in the doorway and crossed to me in 2 steps, and I let him put his arms around me because I was, despite everything, still a person who had just watched her family come apart in real time. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Ask me in an hour, I said. We drove back to the hotel. I took my ibuprofen. I ate half a sandwich Seth picked up from a deli on the way. I called my father's estate attorney to begin the formal challenge to the codicil. At 9:47 that night, my phone lit up with a process server's number. My mother had filed an emergency petition for conservatorship that afternoon. Before the arrest, before the deputies arrived, time to go off regardless of how the meeting ended. Claiming I was mentally incompetent to manage an inheritance due to emotional instability following bereavement, and requesting that a probate judge freeze my access to the trust pending a psychological evaluation. She had set a contingency. If the codicil didn't hold, she would have me declared unfit to receive the inheritance at all. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed and read the petition on my screen, and a cold, clean calm settled over me. Because I had anticipated this. Not conservatorship specifically, I hadn't predicted that particular mechanism, but I had known that someone willing to forge a dead man's signature was not going to have only one plan. And 4 days earlier, when I had called my own attorney in Chicago and laid out the full situation, she had filed a preemptive motion, a formal objection to any forthcoming conservatorship petition, supported by a letter from my physician, 6 years of professional performance evaluations, and my employment record as a licensed forensic accountant in good standing with the Illinois CPA registry. The petition was denied at a hearing 10 days later. The fallout came in stages. Wade pled guilty to a single count of document forgery as part of a plea agreement. 3 years of probation, community service, and restitution paid directly to the estate. My mother faced charges of conspiracy to commit fraud and filing a false conservatorship petition. Her attorneys negotiated a settlement that surrendered her interest in the house she had mortgaged. It went toward the estate's legal costs. She did not go to prison. Some days I make peace with that, other days I don't. But I stopped waiting for a verdict from her that I was ever going to find acceptable. That waiting had been the cage I didn't know I was sitting in. The lake house cleared probate in the spring. Seth and I drove up on a Saturday in March, the last of the snow, still clinging to the edges of the pine trees. The fishing tackle was still in the garage, exactly where my father had always kept it. I stood in the doorway of the kitchen and let myself miss him without also grieving the family he had tried so hard to hold together. Those are two separate losses, and for a long time I couldn't hold them separately. I'm learning. My number is changed, the legal access to the trust is sealed and documented, the house is ours. Seth made coffee and we sat on the back porch with our coats on and watched the ice on the lake begin to consider melting. It was cold and bright and completely quiet. Peace doesn't feel the way I expected. It doesn't feel like winning. It feels like a room where all the noise has finally stopped, and you realize you didn't know how loud it had been until it was gone. If you've ever had to protect yourself from the people who were supposed to protect you, type "worth it" in the comments. I'll be reading every single one.